Thank you for talking with us today. Could you introduce yourself and tell us why we're here?
Sure. My name's Bob Murch, and I'm considered the world's foremost expert on Ouija and talking boards.
Which is kind of a weird thing to think about as being historical, but it is quite old.
It is. So we're here celebrating the 125th anniversary of the Ouija board. And so tomorrow, 125 years to the day, the Ouija board was named at 529 North Charles Street, right here in Baltimore.
Wow. So this is a very Baltimore, this has strong ties to Baltimore.
Ouija is Baltimore's oracle, absolutely. It was made here from 1890 to 1966 when it was sold to Parker Brothers.
Okay. Oh, so when it wasn't with Parker Brothers, it stayed right here and was created here.
Stayed here from the beginning through the folds all the way to 1966.
Wow. So it really, I didn't realize it actually was stayed here for that long. So there was a lot of people who would have had their life would have been working on this.
Oh yeah, I mean, there were 13 different factories from 1890 to 1966 that all, over time, made Ouija boards in Baltimore. So by 1920, Ouija was a leading industry in Baltimore.
Wow. Wow, to think, sorry, it's, I'll say it this way, who doesn't grow up knowing of the Ouija board,
Absolutely.
You either have one or your friends have one. You have your, you get to go to parties and everybody does it, but you don't think of it as history and you don't think of it as something that actually drove economy.
Oh yeah, I mean, so depending on your views on death, if you look at 1890 or go back a little further in the spiritualist movement coming off of the Civil War, just massive death in the country. Everyone experienced it. And here in Maryland, being close to the Mason-Dixon line and being one of those states that was split, they lost a lot of people. And like many states, when someone died on the battlefield, you didn't know what happened to them. So it wasn't just you're dealing with death, you're dealing with the unknown. And we don't have 24/7 cable news to tell us what happened in Libya. I mean, this is just people went away and they never came back. And when you marry that with the rise of the spiritualist movement and the talking board that leaks out of that, then it becomes something that's just huge, more than a fad.
And which is interesting to think that it was so popular back then, but it's only grown in popularity. It's still extremely popular now.
Yeah, well, it's what's really cool is this last movie, Ouija, that came out in October of last year. I got to consult on that. And what I was excited about that movie is that it brought an entirely new generation to the board. So in a time when we're used to tapping and swiping, and how is the Ouija board going to fit into this digital age? Well, now we know, because the movie cost $5 million to make.
Okay.
And in January, when I went up there to be at a release party for the DVD, just before the DVD was released, it hit $100 million worldwide.
Wow.
So that's how popular this still is. And though every fad waxes and wanes, the Ouija board stays popular because it represents a piece of us that never changes, which is what happens when you die. What if this simple game can put you in touch with someone you never got to say goodbye to? You can find out what happened to them. You can apologize for the last thing you said to them, which was horrible. What if it gives you closure? And the fact that when you sit down to play a Ouija board, you're admitting to yourself that there's a possibility that someday you're going to be on the other side of that board. And so it really confronts a lot of basic human things.
I never thought of it that way. And it's just kind of, it's amazing that, how much has it changed? Let me ask you that. How much since when it was patented has it changed?
It hasn't changed very much. I mean, it's a very simple thing. Letters, numbers, yes, no, goodbye. Now, Ouija is a brand and a trademark that's been in continuous use since 1890. Talking boards is the general term. So hundreds, if not thousands, of other talking boards have been made over the time. So you can say talking board, you can say spirit board, you can't say Ouija board on your competing product. But other people made all kinds of things. And often those other talking boards would incorporate what Americans thought were mystical at the time. So every decade it would change. When Ouija first came out, it was called Ouija the Egyptian Luck Board. Why Egypt? Well, in 1890, there were interesting discoveries in the Valley of Kings. It was so far away from America that was mystical. But later, by the 1920s, as India picked up, and that was seen as mystical, they would call it the Hindu luck board. And so it would change over time. And that's what's interesting about the Ouija board that's different than any other spirit communication tool. The Ouija board was invented, and the talking board, to make communication with the other side, right? But because it was marketed as a game, because it leaked out of that movement and went into pop culture, every generation discovers it. And that keeps it in touch with everyone. So these other talking boards that would reflect the decade that they came from would allow another generation to relate and to connect.
So you can actually go and look at the progression of what was popular at the time.
Yeah. Well, as a historian, it's always important to look at what's happening around it. So it's easy to look backwards and to say, oh, it's obvious that this happened, but that's not obvious. It's not the way it happened. It just happened to go that way. And so you have to collect or look at everything that's happening around it. And so other talking boards, newspaper articles, sheet music, photographs, everything helps tell that story. And that's allowed us to really peel back the layers of this mysterious oracle, because as mysterious as to why it works, its origins have been completely lost. And so over this last 20 years, I represent the Talking Board Historical Society. A group of dedicated collectors and historians have been able to collaborate and basically rewrite the history and kind of give Baltimore back its mystifying oracle.
Wow. Yeah, because, as I said, growing up, everybody either has one or knows where they can go to somebody's house. But I know I never thought of where did it come from. I never thought, I came from upstate New York, I never thought that this game I was playing, I'd end up living in the city that it was patented in. It was just this thing that was always there, and everybody always had one.
Yeah. Well, what's unique about Baltimore is that they have been so open over the years to helping preserve and celebrate that history. So later today, the mayor had signed and will issue a mayoral proclamation, and given what's going on right now, it may not be her who reads it, but the city will send a representative, and we're unveiling a plaque that we work with the city that will go into the building where the Ouija board was named and tell that story. So anyone who visits that building will be able to read that this is where this all started. Again,
I'm sorry, I'm like floundering because you think about it, it's being dedicated to, and it's I don't want to, for lack of a better word, it's a board game.
Yeah.
And you, as you said, it hasn't changed much. What other toy that people have played with hasn't changed in over 100 years?
Yeah, well, it so directly connects us with what makes us human, which is our fear of the unknown and death. And in a time coming off the Civil War when death was such a part of our lives. So many people were killed in the Civil War, more than any other war that we've ever been in, decimated the country. We then find ourselves having, people would have 12 children, 6 of them would pass away. So you would take photographs of these dead children, and with your living children, you'd put that up on the wall. Death was just so overwhelmingly a part of your life that it wasn't easier, because death's never easy, but it was just, you had to deal with it. Today, we live in a world where we don't even want to look old. So we have plastic surgery, we dye our hair, we do everything we can to push death as far away. We are very uncomfortable with death. We don't let children go to funerals. Back then, you were 8 years old, you were working.
Right.
You had children to put to work. So today we have this idea of what children are, and we give them a childhood. It's not the same. So today the Ouija board is interesting because it also represents our complete uncomfortableness with death. That whereas they might play it back then because it's just like, yeah, well, there's all this death around us, why not talk to the dead? Here it's, death is so distant and so foreign that talking to the dead is forbidden or taboo. And so there's this feeling around the Ouija board that it's perhaps something bad or evil.
And has that always been like that, or is that something that has developed over the time of being more increasingly uncomfortable with death?
Well, I think, again, what happens it's always interesting to look at that. So the easy answer is, oh yeah, it's changed. But no, not really, because there were always people who said this is bad, you shouldn't be talking to the dead. But again, when your life is overwhelmingly shadowed by death, of course you're going to talk to them, And again, we do all kinds of things we're not supposed to do. The Bible tells us not to do lots of things, we still do it. And so that grew over time in the sense that as Hollywood started to use the board to depict demonic possession, I mean, first you're talking to ghosts, talking to dead
Right.
people, but like it's old, and so you move on to demons because that's cooler and badder and scarier, and now it's all over television. So the idea that you could be possessed by a demon, well, we seem to track that to The Exorcist in 1973, and that adds yet another layer to the Ouija board's life. And so it's evolved over time, but singularly, it always comes down to you're parting the veil. That this for $19.95, you get an unlimited calling plan to the other side, no overages, no roaming.
You were saying that there is waning, it comes back, it goes away. Are you able to track what the mentality or what was happening during those time periods of why it came back? Like you said, it was really popular to start because it was coming off the Civil War. In some of those other periods where it came back from being less popular, are you able to say, well, it was around this time in this event?
Well, so it's hard to track. So we're not there. So all we can do is go back and look for keywords. And if you're researching in newspaper archives, how many times is the word mentioned? Okay. So we see a huge spike during times of war and economic depression, which seems to make sense. So I'm not a statistician, I can't break down the data, but it would make sense that during a time where you're feeling at a loss of control, when things seem bad, you always turn inward. Religion spikes, spirituality. So, talking to an oracle that might provide you an answer you can't get any other way happens. That's what humans do. So that seems to make sense. Now, how much bigger is it? Well, sales tend to, most companies don't release sales figures, but we do see, again, the spike in mentioning. We see advertisements, so that seems to happen. So when it first comes out in 1890, huge. 1920, huge. 1940s, huge. Right, 1960s, by 1966, again, another spike. So you're hitting these huge wars, economic depressions, all of these things are happening, and the Ouija board tends to not take advantage of, but kind of show that this is what's going on. So it's kind of interesting. Now, in today's world, what has really helped the Ouija board is the interest in the paranormal.
So you were saying that the rise in the Ouija board, there's a rise in the Ouija board due to the rise of interest in the paranormal.
Yes.
And why do you think the interest in paranormal has come? I noticed it in the last decade or so. It's really just spiked.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. You can just look at the cable networks. Every network has a paranormal show. Animal Planet has paranormal shows on it.
I didn't know that one.
So there is a huge resurgence, as it always is with death, and there's shows like Supernatural, just tons of entertainment. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, all of these different shows have come up, and so they've actually carried the Ouija board into pop culture again, as opposed to something like economic depression. I mean, we're in a war with terror, that's going on and on. I think that's affecting a lot of stuff too, but paranormal is just huge.
It's kind of telling about the culture and the mindset of the culture at the time. I mean, this is going back over 10 years, but 9/11, that really, I think it was soon after that I started to notice more and more ghost shows on TV, and the popularity just growing.
Yeah. Of course.
Now, how did you come to be interested in this and decide that you were going to start collecting, preserving this history?
Yeah, like anything else, it's like one step at a time. I was raised Orthodox Jew, and my grandmother had me see all the kinds of things my mother said no. So, yeah, Creature Double Feature, you can't watch this. As soon as she'd leave, she put it on. So she took me to see a movie in 1986 called Witchboard. And I was just fascinated that this movie, all about the Witchboard or Ouija board, caused so much controversy. People were scared of paper and plastic, or cardboard, or wood. I mean, it just made me think in my head, that's fascinating. How can something be so polarizing? And as I started researching it, I found that the stories were all different. So go back pre-internet, I'm in college and I have to go to a library, and I don't know if your viewers even know what a library is anymore.
I
But
would
it's like,
hope at least a few of them do.
it's a physical Wikipedia. And so I'd open up an encyclopedia, and every time I looked up Ouija, it said it came from somewhere else. And so I thought, how can something everyone's played with, everyone has a story, everyone knows how to work, you don't even have to tell them, just put it in front of them, and yet we don't know where it comes from. And that set me off on over 2-decade journey to find out who were behind its inception and realize that the real story of the Ouija board is them, and where it started here in Baltimore.
And you said when it was patented, but what is the story of why? Why did they do that? Why did they patent it and create it?
Talking boards existed before the Ouija board, so Ouija is just the most popular. But 4 years before it, actually, we see it erupt in Ohio.
Okay.
And it hit the Associated Press and was written everywhere. But two men from the Eastern Shore in Chestertown in Kent County, E.C. Resch and Charles Kennard, who were business people who had offices right next to each other, both claimed to invent the board that would become Ouija. So Ouija is the capitalist answer to the talking board, because people were making this at home. That's how they did it. So it leaks out of the spiritualist community into pop culture. Regular, average people are like, ooh, this is cool. And so the fad starts. But Ouija was mass manufactured. So within 3 years, they go from one factory in Baltimore to 2 in Baltimore, 2 in Chicago, 2 in New York, and 1 in London. I mean, so they're making something that everyone else could just make at home. But Ouija, the brand, is what it needed. It needed the name. And so once it was named, it took on a life of its own, which is why it's still popular.
And where did they come up with the name?
So that's it. What we're celebrating here is its naming at 529 North Charles Street. And what happened was Charles Kennard, Elijah Bond, and his sister-in-law Helen Peters were all sitting around, and they asked this talking board they were making what it wanted to be called. And it spelled out Ouija. And when they asked what that meant, it said good luck. And so Ouija, the Egyptian luck board, was born.
Wow. And sorry, train of thought lost. Sorry. And why do you think it's important that people remember the board?
Well, I think it's such a reflection of what's inside of us, what makes us human. So though the world has changed incredibly from 125 years ago when it was conceived, one thing hasn't changed, and that's we're going to die. Everyone is going to be on the other side of that board someday. And it is mortality and, everything about us, love, loss, missing things, all of those things, like you're just wondering. And so, whereas back then the entire family played the Ouija board, often today it's people's first experience with the paranormal, so slumber parties and younger people's games. But that's because, kids are just as fascinated by what they don't know as we are, and that's what happens when you die.
And with your society, now you were saying that when you first started to research it, the history was kind of unknown. But has it been your society, the Talking Board Historical Society, that really brought that history back and claimed it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's so our society, kind of loose band of collectors and collaborating. In 2007, we put in that stone for Elijah Bond, the man who patented the Ouija board. So that's Ouija stone is in Greenmount Cemetery. So that's when we really first started saying we could do something. This is lost, and we could work together. And so me and the other members, individually and then collaboratively, have just decided that this is cool, this is fun, and a unique piece of history that was lost. And it is important to celebrate. Baltimore is a city of firsts, and they were the first city to make the Ouija board.
And you were saying there's a proclamation later today. How has the city of Baltimore taken to the history? I mean, this can be a controversial subject. How have they taken to it?
Well, amazingly well. I mean, I've worked over 20 years with many administrations. In 2008, we made the Hartford factory where the Folds made the Ouija board, and we made that a historic landmark, so they were great on that. We put the stone in, and it's been about 2 years in the making to do a proclamation and a plaque. And I think they see the Ouija board as no other city can claim this is where the Ouija board was born. And I just think it's a unique part of its history. But I can understand if a city said, I don't think that's really what we want to do, but that's not been what we've received. In fact, this current mayor has been wonderful. Her office, CHAP, BOPA, we've worked with many different organizations. Basically, Baltimore National Heritage Area was amazing by helping coordinate our efforts with all the different cities, because it's really tough to navigate. I'm from Boston, so I'm not a local boy who has any pull or any connections, but finding these other organizations who also love to celebrate weird and interesting history helped me. So it's a huge collaboration. So you asked, is it just the Talking Board Historical Society? No, it's us with many different city groups, and wouldn't be done without them.
Wow.
So.
What's your next step? I mean, you said that this is, I believe you had the stone, you had the factory.
Yeah.
And now the proclamation. Where are you going to next? What's the next thing that you are trying to keep alive with the history of this?
Well, we're a nonprofit, so all the money that we get from this and from donations goes towards these other things, putting plaques in other places, remembering different things. Our next one is Helen Peters, who's the woman who names the Ouija board. She's considered a strong medium, Elijah Bond's sister-in-law, who was at the board when they asked. She's buried in Denver, and she's in an unmarked grave as well.
Wow.
So we're going to put in a stone that tells her story.
Wow. Well, thank you very much for talking with us, and thank you for putting on the event and showing that history is not, it's something different. There can be history in the game you're playing right in front of you.
Absolutely, and what's interesting is it's a game that deals with death, but it's very much alive today.
Very much alive. Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you for talking with us today. Could you introduce yourself to people who don't know who you are?
My name is Dave Schrader. I'm the host of Darkness Radio, Darkness on the Edge of Town paranormal radio show. We started January 1st, 2006, and we're one of the longest running paranormal themed radio shows.
I actually, and I told you this before, listened to it in about 2007, started listening to it. And what struck me is that you keep an archive available of your interviews with all these with the guests, and people can go back and use them as a research, because it's a lot of times it's a first person document. It's the person that it happened to or that's doing the research talking. And why did you feel it was important to keep it available to people?
Well, and actually, we had a little mishap. iHeartMedia, Clear Channel, that oversees our show, had an issue, and we lost about 4.5 to 5 years of our show. But we've been slowly piecing it back together, so we're rebuilding a new site where we're going to have every episode from our very first episode till today. So we're slowly building the archive. But I thought it was important for a lot of reasons. I mean, Hans Holzer, one of the godfathers of the paranormal field, and in the writings that he did, that's what kind of helped break me into my interest. We were his final interview.
Wow.
So you have people like that had come on the show, and Peter James, the famous psychic medium who worked out at the Queen Mary, we were one of his final interviews. So it's important to keep those voices alive so people can hear the interview that may never have had a chance to hear these speakers before their passing.
And whether there are people who believe or not believe, there's more to it than just the paranormal. This is a history. There is a cultural history. There are something's happening.
Right. Well, and that's part of what drew me to this was the woo-woo factor is cool, and that's the entertainment part.
Yeah.
But it's a great way to spoon-feed people history and educate them without them realizing it. We've always said that our show is to educate, enlighten, but entertain. So if you make people laugh, you make people scared, you make people think, it sticks in their mind a lot better than just dry history. So a lot of these times it's getting to know the history of these locations, histories of who lived there and died there and why they're there. And our good friend Jeff Belanger, the author, he said he believes hauntings and ghosts are history's way of reminding us what happened. And I think that's a fascinating take, is it's so easy to swipe things under the rug and move on, but the ghosts are a way to remind us that we have a past and this is what happened.
The interest in the paranormal I have found, especially with like ghost tours, that it drives people to come to hear, as you said, the woo-woo factor. But I have been on quite a few ghost tours and ended up learning more about the history of the place giving the tour than I did from just reading about.
Right.
And it almost makes it accessible to a large number of people who normally wouldn't think of it as history.
You know, in all aspects, you know, aside from just ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoot, we cover weird conspiracies, and we cover medical conspiracies on our show. And you give it a term like medical conspiracy, and we talked about cancer, and we did a 1-hour show on cancer.
Wow.
And people told me they learned more about what cancer was in that 1 hour than they'd known their entire life. But it's because we packaged it as a conspiracy theory of why aren't we curing this? What's going on? And people tuned in, and we found out what cancer really was, how it affects us, and how it should be able to be combated a lot easier than it is. And you know, the whole big pharma versus us and the, you know, government trying to keep us down or culling the herd, that's just a sideline. The rest of it was it taught people a lot about what we're dealing with.
It's these alternative means of education that I think really need to be fostered, because you tell a kid, yeah, learn history, they're going to, I have to read a book. But you give them it in different ways, and that really just keeps it alive. It's not just a story, it's
exciting.
It's
it gives it something, right? It bonds. You know, it gives them something to latch onto aside from this. And I've found that with my own children. I have 7 kids. And I've got, you know, 2 of my kids are very interested in what I do. The rest, you know, that's cool, Dad, but they're on with their own lives. But 2 of my kids are very focused and interested in what I do. And they like to watch shows with me and documentaries and learn, and then I'll hear them telling their friends, and it's not always the ghost story they're telling them, it's the story or the history behind the story. And then they'll spook their friends out with the ghost story aspect. But I'm surprised. I mean, it's a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old.
wow.
And they're learning, and they understand where we're coming from, what happened. I bought the In Search Of DVD set, the entire 144 episodes. And my daughter said, can this be our show, Dad? Can we watch this together? 10 years old. I said, sure, let's watch this together. And here she starts watching shows about the Bermuda Triangle. And what she thought was fascinating was not so much the whole disappearance, but all the stories, you know, the squadron of trained pilots that went missing in the Bermuda Triangle, and the backup group that went in after them that went missing. And then learning that part of our history and knowing what's going on, and that fascinated her as much as the weirdness of the Bermuda Triangle.
And speaking of the squadrons, that aspect of having these interviews with the people, it puts a face. I mean, even though it's radio, it's still putting a face on the history. Instead of just this big event, the Bermuda Triangle, things disappeared. These are the squadrons. These are the people. And
like Bruce Gernon, we talked to, who wrote a book called The Fog with Rob McGregor, and he talks about his flight through this time tunnel, this weird cloud vortex. And you get to hear it, and you know, people mistake, well, it's just radio, you don't get the visual. I think what we create in our mind is so much more impactful. That's why I love the medium of radio. I grew up listening to the old-time radio cassettes of the Lone Ranger and the Shadow and all of those characters, and I loved them. And that's what fascinated me with radio. I started doing recordings in my garage with my little black tape recorder of my own radio shows when I was a kid. And then here all these years later, we're doing that. But it's about painting the picture of who we are talking to, what their story was, and trying to flesh and cull out sometimes the part of the story that even they forgot about, or that, you know, really kind of justifies what they're doing.
Wow. Yeah, because I know, you know, there's all the paranormal shows out there, but there's always a special place in my heart for the radio shows, because when you see that reenactment of the ghost, it's never quite as scary as it is in your head.
Right. Exactly. And we've had so many great ghost guests on that their telling of the story without a visual is sometimes so much more chilling than what they actually experienced, you know, or what we would see in a fake reenactment.
Yeah.
And sometimes you'll get a feel for it, be like, "Ooh, that'd be weird." But when you're getting that mental image painted for you of the black-eyed children standing outside your door trying to get in, and you hear about the person's desperation and nervousness and upset stomach and the smell that surrounded them, and your visual cortex just takes over, and you're just seeing these in your mind's eye, and I can guarantee you nothing will be creepier than that.
Well, thank you very, very much
Sure.
for talking with us.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for passing
you.
it on.
Hi, thank you for talking with us today. Could you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is John Kozik, and I'm a director at the Talking Board Historical Society.
And what is the Talking Board Historical Society?
It's a group of collectors and historians that have gotten together that all share a passion for talking boards and the history behind that. You know, the people that manufactured it, where it was manufactured, different designs of the boards, and basically just the general history of that.
And now you were telling me before that this is your collection, or some of your collection.
Yep.
What brought you to say, I want to start collecting talking boards?
I inherited my grandmother's board. She used it growing up. I have great memories of relatives coming to the house and, lining out the door while she used it. And so when she passed away, I inherited her board, and it was very worn. You could barely see any of the letters and numbers in it. And that was the first one I got. And from that made me just start thinking about other ones and started looking around, and just got interested in all the different designs, and that there was such a variety out there. And I bought another one, and then before you know it, just kind of snowballed from that. I mean, I always liked morbid and more like Halloween, vintage Halloween stuff, so I already kind of came from that. And then got the Ouija board thinking, oh, it's kind of creepy. I remember, stories of playing it as a kid, and then, like I said, my grandmother's board. So that's what first started me.
And what can you get from the history of the Ouija board and the talking boards? Why is it important to you to preserve the history?
Well, I mean, I live in Massachusetts, and there's been a few manufacturers in Massachusetts. And so I have that local connection first to find out, especially W.S. Reed Toy Company, which is in Leominster, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And I spend every week going to Leominster, Massachusetts. So to know that one of the earliest manufacturers was right in my backyard, I have a connection to that. And, as far as with boards made in Baltimore and everything, to know that these people, the manufacturers came out of where it started from and the local connections to those, in Leominster, Massachusetts, that was pretty much, they were the largest toy company in the country for a few years.
Wow.
So, they employed so many people, and I'm sure here in Baltimore with William Fold and Kennard, I mean, to know that there was so many factories around here that, so many people are connected to it just from that part, let alone, everyone growing up with the story of using it themselves,
And that's really what struck me when I first heard that there was a Ouija board convention, is like, and that board game that I had when I was a kid.
Sure.
Because that's a lot of people, their first introduction is you're over at a friend's house at night, let's play with the Ouija board. But it's really a cultural phenomenon, and it's been around, this is the 125th anniversary, and to think that it was such an industry for these areas, it's kind of amazing to think about.
Yeah, and a lot of people, they get into ghost hunting, or, most people's first introduction to the paranormal is through a Ouija board.
Right.
So it just brings everything together, starting at the basics, basically.
Well, thank you for talking with us.
Yeah, of
and
course.
Thank you for putting your collection on display for people to see.
Oh, no problem. Please enjoy the rest of it.
Thank
So
you.
much more.
The Ouija board, it's 125 years old. There's not a lot of board games or even anything like this, I guess you could say toys, that are still so popular 125 years later. What do you think it is about the Ouija board?
Well, I think the Ouija board, it's very accessible. First of all, people can get it. And I think, going through pop culture and, having the element of, does this really work? Is something bad going to happen? And for me, it was always drawn to the dark side of it. Thinking the possibility of, like, is this really going to work? And or is this just all, we're making this up?
Right.
So I think that, just the fact that you can find it, you can get it around, and it's very easy to play with, and in hopes that it's harmless, or.
And I guess it's kind of interesting to think that something that interested somebody 125 years ago is still interesting people today, especially with video games and
Sure.
all those things that are so flashy that something as simple as a board and a planchette could capture people still.
Yeah, I mean, it has staying power for sure. There's not too many other boards or too many games that, can say they're over 100 years old.
Well, first of all, thank you guys so much for coming here and helping celebrate Ouija's 125th anniversary. Hope you guys have had fun so far. So, this event is 125 years in the making, but for me personally, it's 2 years in the making. I first approached the mayor's office about how we could coordinate efforts to celebrate this anniversary, the naming of the Ouija board, and started 2 years ago. And thanks to a lot of people. This is, by the way, the Talking Board Historical Society. These are directors right here, so please give them a warm round of applause. None of this would happen without them. They're all awesome. They make me look really good, so I like that. That's cool. But also in the audience, as we've talked about, there are a lot of family members. So we have representative of the Fold family. So if you're a Fold descendant, raise your hand. Give it up to the Folds. They're everywhere around here. Perfect. As I said in my presentation, clearly we would not be talking about this if it wasn't for William Fold. He just made the Ouija board a staple in Baltimore and an industry from 1890 to 1966. We also have a descendant of Charles Kennard in the audience. So LaVale, raise your hand. You give it up to Carl. Now, what's really cool is we have a cake, two actually, and they were made by the great grandson of E.C. Resch. So Ken, where are you? And the answer is right over here. So thank you him for the cake. All of these families, again, have opened their hearts and their houses and helped us piece together this puzzle. We wouldn't be here without them, so thank you. And I'm going to introduce Councilman Costello, who represents the district where the plaque will go. So give him a warm round of applause. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much for coming. Just by a quick show of hands, how many people are from Baltimore City? And how many people are visiting for the first time? Okay, great. My name's Eric Costello. I'm the city councilman for the 11th district, which covers the peninsula up to North Ave, and of course, where we are right now in historic Mount Vernon. We're here today, obviously, to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the Ouija board. It's been made in Baltimore City proudly for the last 75 years, among many other things that are made in this great city. I want to thank the Fold family descendants, Jason Vaughn, and everyone else who was responsible for putting this together. I would encourage you to visit 529 North Charles Street, right up the block in historic Mount Vernon. It's one of the best neighborhoods in this city. There's a ton of history there. There is the first monument in the United States to our first president, George Washington, and it's probably my favorite thing in Baltimore City. I hope that the many of you that raise your hands that do not live in Baltimore City will consider coming back on July 4th. There's going to be a 100th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone. There's going to be a ton of stuff, a ton of cool stuff going on up there, and I hope you will consider coming back. The city has a lot to offer, and we're very welcoming to visitors. So please come back, and thank you for coming out today.
So I think next we're going to have the person who actually did all the work and who, again, made me look really good. So I like him a lot. Jason Vaughn is from the Baltimore National Heritage area, and when I first approached the mayor's office, he was basically the person who coordinated working with all the different groups. So CHAP, BOPA, you name it. This is the guy who did it all. So it wouldn't have happened without him. So please, warm round of applause for Jason. Thank you.
First, welcome to Baltimore. I hope you're enjoying your stay here, and like Councilman Casella said, get out and explore the wonderful different neighborhoods we have here in the city. I work for the Baltimore National Heritage Area. What we do, we help promote heritage tourism and use that as a tool to spur economic development. And we also work with neighborhoods to help them learn their history and also share that history with visitors. So it's it's a win-win. We get to make great neighborhoods and also encourage people to come and see our great city. Baltimore's neighborhoods certainly have a lot of stories to tell. The Ouija connections to Baltimore let us shine a spotlight on places like Greenmount Cemetery, which is where Ouija inventor Elijah Bond is buried, as well as Mount Vernon Historic District, where Ouija got its name. We here in the city are proud of our historic firsts. Here Ouija was first named and then manufactured for more than 75 years. Manufacturing innovation is in Baltimore's blood. It was here that the first gaslit lights illuminated the streets, all the way back in 1817. The nation's first long-distance railroad was born here, the famous Baltimore and Ohio. And there's the great B&O Railroad Museum, definitely worth a visit before you head out. The linotype typesetting machine was invented here, completely revolutionizing the newspaper industry. And if you have a chance, the Baltimore Museum of Industry has a working machine, and they have their 85-year-old operators do a demonstration. So that's a wonderful thing as well. And we also claim the bottle cap, developed by Baltimore's Crown Cork and Seal back in 1892. And of course, we're the birthplace of the Star Spangled Banner. You may have heard about that earlier this year, or back in 2014. And we're very proud to have the Ouija board included in our roster of historic firsts. It's another story that we can share with visitors, past, present, and future. Again, thank you for being here and enjoy your stay in Baltimore.
Great. So now we're going to actually read the proclamation, and as you may have heard, the mayor's a little busy right now, so they sent Casey here, so nice to come here and do this, and she's going to actually read the proclamation. So.
It's kind of wordy, so bear with me. Wanted to say good afternoon. I'm here on behalf of Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake. Obviously she can't be here today, but we're delighted that you're here for OuijaCon and to celebrate the 125th birthday of the Ouija board and how it can trace its origin back to our great city. I am proud to present a proclamation from the mayor commemorating the talking board, its history, and its connections to our great city. And hold it up for us. Oh, so not that you can see this from here, but I'm gonna read it from my notes. Oh, there you go. Is that better? All right. Whereas, following its naming by Helen Peters and commercial introduction in Baltimore by businessmen Charles Kennard and Elijah Bond in 1890, the Ouija board was introduced as a parlor game born out of American spiritualist movement of the mid-1800s, led by William Fuld and his family. The Ouija board was once a prolific industry in our city, having 13 factories from 1890 to 1966. And whereas a method of supposed communication with the spirit world, the Ouija board has terrified countless slumber-partying children, served as the plot vehicle in a number of Hollywood films, and whereas the board's instant and now, 125 years later, prolonged success showed that it tapped into a weird place in American culture. It was marketed both as a mystical oracle, as family entertainment, and fun with other and worldly excitement. And whereas the city of Baltimore has always prided itself for being a city of firsts, the Ouija board is yet another testament to the innovations that Baltimoreans have developed throughout our city's history. And whereas all of Baltimore's citizens celebrate the invention, history, and continued success of Baltimore's own talking board, the Ouija, happy 125th anniversary. Therefore, on behalf of Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake, Mayor of the City of Baltimore, I do hereby proclaim April 25th, 2015 as Ouija Board Day in Baltimore, and do urge all citizens, past, present, and future, to join in on this celebration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so besides this proclamation, we work together with all these different groups to have a plaque that will be placed in the building in 529 North Charles. Has anyone visited there before? It's at the corner of Charles and Center Street, and there's a 7-Eleven that's at the bottom of it. And this plaque is actually going in the 7-Eleven because it's a place that most people are going to see, and a very prominent place. So as you're shopping your late night munchies, you'll be able to read about the Ouija board. So, yeah. Gene, why don't you unveil the plaque? There you go, you guys. So would you like to read it? So Jason's going to read you the plaque because you can't see it from there. So hold on one second.
Everybody get binoculars. You can read along with me. Okay. History is rife with tales of prophecy, fortune-telling, and divination. I should have read this ahead of time. At this site in April 1890, one of the world's most popular methods for divining one's fate received its name, and the Ouija board, Baltimore's famous mystifying oracle, was born. For generations, Ouija's mysterious messages have intrigued people of all ages. When users rest their fingertips lightly on the planchette, the pointer moves over the board's alphabet to spell out words, answer questions, and deliver cryptic messages. Ever fascinating, Ouija has become an integral part of popular American culture. It was here at 529 North Charles Street where the famous Ouija board received its name. According to those present, the board named itself when asked what it wanted to be called. On that night, an American icon was created, one that every generation revisits. Led by William Fuld, Ouija became a leading industry in Baltimore, produced in 13 different factories across the city from 1890 to 1966. In 1919, Ouija's first manufacturer, Charles Kennard, recounted the origins of Ouija's name to the Baltimore American and Sun newspapers. End quote. One evening about April 1890, while trying the board with a Mrs. Peters in a large boarding house at that time on the corner of Charles and Center Streets, I remarked that we had not yet settled upon a name, and as the board had helped us in other ways, we would ask it to propose one. It spelled out O-U-I-J-A. When I asked the meaning of the word, it said, "Good luck." Mrs. Peters thereupon withdrew from her neck a chain which had, at the end of a locket, on it the figure of a woman, and at the top the word Ouija. We asked her if she had thought of this name, and she said she had not. We then adopted the word. Charles Kennard, first to manufacture the Ouija board. Congratulations.
So again, thank you so much for coming. It's a pretty historic moment for me because honestly, I love the Ouija board. So do all the people here. Did we ever think we'd be in the city dedicating a plaque celebrating the 125th anniversary? No. But again, we have some cake and some wonderful planchette lollipops that were made by one of our director's wives, Kate. So please enjoy yourselves. Come up here and I guess you guys come up. Oh yeah, I guess we'll get some pictures first. Thank you. Oh, yeah, come back here for a second, Gene. We're going to do a group picture.
Bob, I have to say you're amazing for putting this all together.
Thank you, but honestly, it's all the people you see standing here. Everyone played a role, including the city. So thank you again, Mayor's Office and Baltimore National Heritage Area, CHAP, all the people who made this possible. And thank you to the Fuld family, the Resch family. It's just the Kennard family. It's amazing. So thank you guys, and let's enjoy some cake.